And then, after it had all burned and the ash had settled, he blamed the Christians for it. He said it was the Christians that did this. They did it deliberately to get at us. We, the poor Romans, with our great traditions, those horrible foreigners, those immigrant types, those slightly brown type of people, close, and those Jew type people, they did this. And so Paul then, Nero then arrested Paul, who was happily living in house arrest, like hoping to be let off. And he tried him, and Peter, who was the other, a really great disciple of Jesus, was also under house arrest in Rome at the same time. And he had them sentenced to death. He didn't give them a fair trial. There was no evidence. They'd not done anything wrong. They were just like wandering teachers. But he had them both cruelly killed. I think Peter was crucified, head down, and Paul, because he was a Roman citizen, was decapitated with the sword because it's quicker and doesn't hurt so much, and Paul, as a Roman citizen, couldn't be crucified. So that was the end of him. But his work lived on, and his disciples lived on. Paul had a close friendship with Luke, who was probably in Rome at the time, writing the Gospel of Luke and Acts. And there's a very interesting historical reconstruction of this, that it's thought that the Gospel of Luke was written for the trial. The idea was to say, no, this is what happened. He's not a rabble-rouser. This is the story of Jesus, and this is the story of Paul and stuff. I think it's the most likely explanation. But it didn't work, and probably they never even read it in court, or Nero would never have read it. If he had, I don't think he would have tolerated. I don't think he would have had them executed like he did. And history would have been very different. But the trouble with corrupt people is that they won't listen, and they don't respond. So that's what happened to Paul, and that very early phase of the church. Now, but it took, and that was all happening in about 67, 66 AD, about 33 years after Christ himself had been executed. Okay, but enough people had heard of Christ that it didn't die. I mean, it might have been. I mean, certainly Nero tried to kill every single Christian in Rome. And what he did was he sent his troops throughout the city, rounding them up. And he had them taken to a big park, public park, and crucified. Oh, you like your Jesus guy? Well, we're going to do the same to you. We'll crucify you all. And then he invented a new sport, which is whilst they're on the cross, because it took too long to die, he then went round, had his soldiers daub them with pitch and oil and stuff, and set light to them, so that they were on the cross burning away. And he was watching from a podium with his henchmen, laughing. And he said, this is great, these Christians believe in light, well, we'll torch them. Now, what kind of a sick sadist? I mean, he was obviously a sadist. He took pleasure in other people's suffering. And it's, a very moving story. So for the next couple of hundred years, Christianity was a persecuted religion. And if you were found to be a Christian, you would be often killed in often quite a gruesome way. The Romans invented, because the Roman state run by Nero carried on, and it saw these Christians as troublemakers, rabble-rousers, scum of the earth, who had no human rights, who were not allowed defence lawyers or anything, and just being a Christian was an offence enough to be killed, tortured, murdered, whatever. Some emperors did it more than others. Some tried not to do it very much because they were quite clever emperors. Not every emperor was really evil, but some of them were really evil, and they insisted that every single governor in every part of the Roman Empire should arrest all the Christians and kill them. Now at that point, that's when the Gnostic Gospels were buried, because obviously it was a group that were being persecuted who wanted to save these texts. Anyway, it's a long story. I won't go into every detail, but a lot of people were killed, and they became what's called martyrs. So the martyrs of the church, martyr in Greek simply means a witness. So they were simply people who'd witnessed to Jesus' teachings. They'd known people who'd met him and were impressed and decided to organise space in their lives for these teachings. And a lot of them were here in Gaul, because the idea of Christ's teachings came to France here quite early on. Lyon was a great centre for early Christianity. A man called Irenaeus was a very learned scholar and writer and sage here in, not far from here, Lyon. And unfortunately lots of people were killed off because the Roman rulers of Gaul didn't like the Christian thing. They thought these people are just causing trouble, let's kill them off, you know. But of course it didn't work, because then people ask questions like, well, what's so wrong with them? Why are they killing them? Oh, they believe in peace, love and non-violence and being faithful in marriage and looking after your children. What? And they're killing them? Yes, because the emperor's gone mad. You know, so the word spread among the largely Celtic tribes of Gaul and Britannia that actually this Jesus guy must have been quite a good bloke, like to make the Romans that angry, because the Romans were pretty corrupt, everyone knew it. So the idea of being a Christian became like, yeah, I want to. You know, it was like an act of resistance, effectively. And those first 3 centuries were very interesting. I've been here around La Creuse to places like Toussaint-Croix, which is a beautiful magical spot. And there was an early saint called Saint Martial, Saint Martial, who was supposed to be one of the first teachers of Christianity in this part of France, who made that his base. It's a beautiful hill not far from here, Toussaint-Croix. And in the church, which is really ancient, there's something interesting. There's a statue on stone of Luke, the Celtic or Druid god of light, who was a great hero to the Celts and the Druids, who would have been the local priests and spiritual elders of this part of Europe for centuries. When they heard of Christ's teachings, I think they realised, okay, so Christ, he must be some kind of incarnation of Luke. He's like Luke turned up in history. He must be a son of God then, you know, which was a Celtic word for describing someone with spiritual depth. And so in the church at Toussaint-Croix, there's, underneath the main tower, there's a stone which has Luke on it. So what happened was that the local Celtic Druids, who kind of accepted Christ's teachings, then wanted to be faithful to their ancient god of light and put him into the church at the foundation, which is an architectural representation of how the ancient wisdom moved on and blended with the new wisdom of Christ. And there are loads of examples of that, you know, throughout the Christian world, where these, I don't think it was a sudden change. It was you know, the Druids of Britain and stuff. They accepted Christ as a wise rabbi, a wise teacher. You know, but they didn't necessarily accept everything that the official church said about Christ. So that, how is that possible? Okay, so what happened was, for about 3 centuries after Christ's life and death, the Roman Empire was you know, having swirls and eddies of different thinkers, different sages. It was, the Roman army liked the mysteries of Mithras. A lot of them became initiates of Mithras, a sort of early form of Freemasonry. There were Jewish representatives in the Roman Empire throughout, and the Isis cult of Egypt was very popular. A lot of people followed the Egyptian religion. It was popular in Rome. There were temples to Isis and all that. But gradually the Christian thing spread, and I don't know, it's a sort of quirk of history that one of the contenders for the emperorship, Constantine, happened to win a battle in Italy at Milvan Bridge in the early 4th century, about 314, and he promised to convert the empire to Christianity if he won the battle. his mother, Saint Helena, who was quite a devout Christian, had been married to a top Roman general called Constantine, and or Constantius, and actually who'd served some of his time up in Britain because it was part of the Roman Empire, and when his father died, Constantine was then declared emperor by the army in York. But some other people didn't accept that because this is standard stuff. The emperors always became disputed. And so Constantine had to then march from York all the way down to Italy with his army and win the battle. His mother was probably with him, supporting him. Anyway, psychologically she persuaded him, look, if you win the battle and become emperor, don't stop all this persecution of Christians. It's just not on. I'm one, you know. And he did. He stuck to his word. And he issued a declaration in Milan, which is a very important declaration, basically giving religious freedom and tolerance to everyone in the empire. So you could follow anything you want, including Christianity from now on, as long as you weren't like doing wicked stuff or practicing human sacrifice or, you know, killing virgins or something bonkers. You weren't allowed to do that. But as long as you stuck to the basic laws and ethics, then you were fine and you were protected by law. And I've been to Milan and seen the, you know, text of this declaration. Milan was a Druid foundation, actually, as a city in North Italy, and it's really interesting role in history. But anyway, so after that declaration, the Christians could come out the woodwork, and suddenly, you know, the butcher or the baker or the fisherman or the local Druid said, yeah, actually, I'm a sort of Christian, and it became, and you couldn't be persecuted or killed. The church had its structures, and this is where we're still on box 33, the Orthodox bit comes in. Because Constantine wanted, from his perspective, there were too many sects, too many divisions of this Christianity thing. He decided, okay, the Christians are good, we're going to let them flourish. But they were always arguing, and they were always disputing about Christ. You know, had Christ gone up into the sky, and was he up there? Did he go to India, some people said, or was he, like, you know, and what was it about marriage? Were you allowed one wife or more than one wife? What if you didn't want to get married? Was that allowed? You know, etc., etc. And all divisions were going on. So he thought, if I assemble all the bishops, which were the head Christians in each province, bring them all together to near my new capital of Byzantium, which I've just founded, and it was renamed Constantinople, you know, like calling it Daphnopolis, a slight touch of megalomania there, I'd say. Then all the bishops will put them in a conference hall, and we won't let them out till they agree on the fundamental doctrine. What does the church believe? You know, and the thing is, Constantine wasn't an intellectual, he was a general. He was a general stock. The statues of him, he has a really big, thick neck and big jaw, you know, he's like, you know, don't mess with me, or you know, he was a thug kind of guy, and actually, yeah. So the kind of common denominator that he made all these bishops sign up to was not very subtle and sophisticated. I think Paul himself would have been slightly shocked at like how simplistic it was. I also think Jesus would have hardly recognised what they were teaching as Christianity, because it was all centred on faith in Christ, you know, faith in the resurrection, and believing in 10 impossible things to prove that you're a Christian. It became now a sort of badge of honour. Yeah, I believe in the resurrection and, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no discussion, no evidence, it's just like, that's your entry ticket. You're not even allowed in the church unless you say that. Well, that's not, I don't think, what Paul and Jesus would have wanted. I think they were open for discussion and dispute. You see, you can't really do philosophy unless you can discuss and have arguments and then look at evidence. So the kind of Christianity that emerged after Constantine got his hands on it was was a bit of a dumbing down from the original McCoy, in my opinion. I think, if you look at the facts, that's true. So this was a problem because now there are officials who now are officials of the empire. And after Constantine, several emperors made it even more like official. And you had, within a century and a half of Constantine's death, you had to be a Christian to even get basic human rights. You couldn't even, now the persecution was on the other foot, you couldn't be a pagan anymore. You had to be a Christian to even vote or become a magistrate or be a teacher. And after about, certainly within 200 years or so, they shut down all the pagan schools and academies. So even the great teaching school of Athens was closed by order of a Christian emperor, Theodosius, who said, I'm not letting those pagans teach, they're all heretics. They teach you can reach enlightenment without Christ. Well, what's going to happen to my monopoly of spiritual power if me as the emperor and him as the archbishop, there are people circumventing that and going straight to God? No, that can't be done. So they changed the meaning of what orthodox actually means. For Aristotle, it meant going straight to God. Now they're saying, no, you can't. You have to come via the church and via our interpretation of the Gospels. They said after a while, you're not even allowed to read the Bible in your own way. You have to accept our interpretation. And there began a whole long struggle. And so Orthodox, now we've got to a situation in Russia. Russia believes that it inherited the mantle when Byzantium was captured by the Muslims in 1453. The Orthodox Church didn't quite know what to do because that was its headquarters. Constantinople was renamed Istanbul and turned into a Muslim city. So what do, the Orthodox people? Well, they were scattered around Eastern Europe because they'd spread through the Slavic world. Teachers had translated the Bible into Slavic languages, Macedonian and Czech and Russian eventually, and Polish and so on. And eventually, in about the 1400s, a very fierce, tyrannical and cruel ruler of Moscow called Ivan the Terrible, who was into torture in a big way, decided he was the new Rome. Moscow was going to be like replacing Rome. I mean, he might as well just declare himself the new Nero, because although he had a veneer of Christianity, his interpretation of it was so far away from what Christ would have wanted that it's just mind-blowing. Ivan the Terrible used to have people tortured to death in front of him because he accused them of heresy, in order to save them the suffering of eternal hellfire, because he interpreted, as did all these pseudo-Orthodox Christians, the idea of hell being a literal place of eternal punishment if you do anything against the teachings of the church, which to me is like psychological warfare, So you're doing them a favour by torturing them to death, because if at the moment that they're expiring you've chopped all their limbs off, you've just torn their skin off, and they say, oh, I'm sorry, I repent, I'm Orthodox, then they can die happy because now they'll go to heaven. Even though you've mangled them and you've killed them, if they say those words at the last minute, I'm sorry, I was a heretic, now I repent, I'm an Orthodox, then you go to heaven. And Ivan justified it in his mind that by torturing people to death like that, he was saving their souls from eternal punishment. And therefore, a little bit of pain, it'll only take 24 hours to torture you to death, that's going to save you an infinite number of eons in eternal damnation. Now, I don't find that logic very compelling, because for a start, I don't see anywhere in the biblical tradition or any of the spiritual traditions any authentic teaching that is about eternal punishment and damnation. Buddhism, yes, there are hells, but you can work your way out of them. Otherwise, what's the point of studying philosophy? I mean, even Voltaire wrote a very witty play about a druid who found himself in the afterlife getting some rough treatment from devil-type things. And then Orpheus comes and rescues him and says, yeah, okay, So Voltaire thought about this as well. So anyway, that's that, and that was justified as orthodox. And you see what Putin is doing with his Kirill, who's the patriarch of Moscow now, who believes he's the head of the Orthodox Church. They justify their war on Ukraine because they're Catholics and therefore heretics. You know, they don't even accept other Christians. And so it's a madness. This is a complete madness. It's not Christianity, it's a fake thing, which masquerades as Christianity. Just as Nazism wasn't socialism, it masqueraded as something and ended up doing pogroms and the Holocaust. So anyway, orthodoxy, yes. I mean, having said all which, it also has some truly orthodox saints and seers. It's produced great thinkers like Tolstoy and Merezhkovsky and other great philosophers, Berdyaev, Solovyev, and a whole bunch of saints that I don't, like any dictionary of saints, a lot of them are orthodox. Saint Gregory the Great and Saint Gregory Nazianzus, and often they came from what was the Byzantine Empire, around Anatolia and so on, and Greece. And Mount Athos is this beautiful peninsula in the north of Greece that comes down, close to where Aristotle was born, where there's a big concentration of Orthodox monasteries where people still live, and keep up a daily life of prayer. So, it's like heaven and hell, good and evil going on, the battleground, inside the Orthodox tradition. Because there are great Orthodox teachers I've met. I knew some Orthodox priests in London. I used to go to the Orthodox Cathedral, St. Sophia, and do services with them. I belonged to a thing called the Fellowship of St. Alban and St. Sergius, which was for ecumenical fraternity between the Orthodox Church and the Anglican Church. And, I've given papers and had discussions with advanced Orthodox theologians, but what I don't accept and find difficult in the Orthodox Church is this sort of dark stuff. And I don't think it should be swept under the carpet. We have to be honest about this stuff. Hold it up to the light. And anyway, that's an introduction to that first box. We'll have a break now, okay, and some questions and things. And then we'll come back and look at the second one.